Russia's information war against the West has reached a new level. The Kremlin no longer relies solely on the Ostankino Tower. Since 2022, the EU has banned a number of Russian propaganda outlets from broadcasting across Europe. But official Moscow has learned to disguise its sources. By building a network of fake media companies and social media channels, Russia is infecting the Western information space with its narratives. The Kremlin controls numerous shadow media outlets. Moreover, it actively spreads fakes internationally through artificial intelligence. Today, the Putin regime's information aggression has become one of the main tools in its war against Ukraine and the West. How does Russia bypass EU restrictions in the information space? What is Kremlin propaganda capable of? And can artificial intelligence be influenced by it? AI tools have become accessible to millions worldwide. Society now consumes unlimited amounts of information, and Russian propaganda is taking full advantage. Across numerous websites, it spreads fake stories online, trying to mislead the most popular chatbots like ChatGPT, Gemini, and Grok.
So a couple ways that this can be done. You may remember the story of Copy Cop, John Mark Dugan, the American living in Moscow who has an AI-generated news empire, where Russia used to have to write articles itself to hire, young people who spoke English well to write fake news articles. Now you can generate ideologically, idiomatically, grammatically correct English news articles targeted to a specific audience using AI models, and then post those models across the internet. So that's one way that we've seen that working. We've also seen AI-enabled influence operations with AI chatbots determining not only what to post, but when to post it, and having those kind of automated activities taken over by an AI, decreasing the cost, but increasing potentially the resonance of those messages. And then finally, my organization, the American Sunlight Project, identified we believe an influence operation through the Pravda network, which is run by a gentleman, by all accounts, who lives in Crimea, in Russian-occupied Crimea. And he is running a content aggregation network that is translated into many, many, many different languages, targeting over 100 different geographic locations around the world. ChatGPT or other chatbots, large language models, are scraping a whole bunch of data at any given moment from the internet, particularly data that's not licensed, not copyrighted in any way. They scrape all that up. They learn from it, and then they write to people who are using chatbots like ChatGPT or others. If somebody asks, was there a Russian attack in Sumy today? It will spit back articles from this Pravda network. So it's spread even outside of Russia-created influence operations and accounts.
LLM grooming, a new method of information warfare. This tactic spreads Russian propaganda through AI language models by building a decentralized network of media sites, Telegram channels, X accounts, and Facebook pages disguised as independent analysis platforms. Dozens of automated outlets cover Europe, Africa, and the Middle East, generating about 350,000 articles per month in 50 languages. Russia floods the internet with fakes, poisoning the datasets AI models train on. When disinformation becomes widespread, chatbots begin to repeat it to millions. These IT centers are typically based in Russia or Russian-occupied territories of Ukraine.
Unfortunately, the LLM grooming is something that is really incumbent on the individual AI platforms to get out of their models. So my colleague Sophia Freuden and I argue that the companies who are creating large language models really need to be careful about what goes into their training data. And unfortunately, as we discovered in a conversation with AI expert Gary Marcus, it's much harder to remove that data once it's been fed into the system. The reliability of their sources before before really, taking that information to be true.
This system is completely controlled by the Kremlin. The main narratives, the main special operations, they are carried out with the Kremlin's knowledge, and very often they are conducted using the resources of either the Ministry of Defense, the mass media, or special centers where people work, hired personnel. So, we understand that this system has resources, it has expertise. We remember how information came to light about the so-called troll factories that operated in St. Petersburg, where people were hired to write comments, engage in discussions, and publish various posts. This is part of that big machine, and other investigations conducted by our colleagues indicated that at the head of this system is Sergei Kiriyenko, this octopus with many tentacles who literally approves the narratives. They analyze how this or that special operation went, how successful it was, whether it should be continued, or perhaps if some approaches need to be changed.
As is known, Russia's information war is directed not only by TV propagandists, but also by a number of military and intelligence agencies. Andriy Kovalenko, head of the Center for Countering Disinformation under Ukraine's National Security and Defense Council, described the structures that use neural networks to conduct information operations against Ukraine and the West. These include units of the FSB and GRU, as well as the IPSO Center of Russia's Western Military District in St. Petersburg, which runs campaigns to create visual noise. This includes generating images allegedly from the scene, fake documents, and social media posts in Ukrainian and Polish. In addition, key executors and coordinators of such operations are known. Among them are the Internal Policy Department, headed by Sergei Kiriyenko, and defense enterprises such as Rostec, Kremlin, and Galactica. These organizations develop systems to monitor and manage disinformation campaigns.
As a rule, when the Russian authorities carry out some operations on the ground, they try to prepare public opinion. We saw how in 2014 Russian propaganda first tried to prepare the operation in Crimea, and then the operation in Donbass. The main role in influencing our country was played by Russian media, Russian TV channels, Russian television. Let's remember that at the beginning of 2014, Russian television was completely accessible to the Ukrainian population. People watched talk shows, they watched entertainment shows, and naturally, on these channels, they saw the news produced by Russia. We saw how, a year before the start of the full-scale invasion, Russian propaganda began preparing public opinion for the inevitability of war against Ukraine. They gradually started moving away from the rhetoric about brotherly nations. On talk show broadcasts, they began discussing, Russian officials included, the necessity of strikes, missile strikes on Bankova Street, and other targets, infrastructure sites. Before 2021, only 1 or 2 Russian politicians could say such things, like Zhirinovsky. No other Russian officials could do that. And for a whole year now, we've been seeing this stream of hatred pouring out of Russian TV channels. People were literally being prepared for the idea that war was needed, that it was necessary, and the war happened. Now we see that the main channels for spreading these narratives are social networks and messengers. In other words, the intermediary, the journalist, has disappeared from the path between those who produce disinformation and propaganda and the people who see all this every day, who read these telegram channels, which are made by who knows whom and backed by who knows who, anonymous telegram channels. So what has changed is, first of all, the way people receive information.
We've seen a really interesting shift in Russian information warfare and disinformation tactics since Russia started first using these in what I call kind of the post-Soviet modern period of disinformation. Obviously, Russia has been using disinformation since the Soviet period as well, to today. If you fast forward to 2013, 2014, at the beginning of the war with Ukraine, Russia was using a lot more kind of brute force tactics, I would say. They weren't trying to be very covert about what they were doing. It was a lot of posting as trolls on internet forums, on news websites, and on social media as well. A lot of what we call inauthentic activity. So accounts that aren't real people, that are maybe being controlled by multiple people or one person controlling multiple accounts, post like Facebook groups and Telegram groups that were locally focused, that had kind of an easy entry point in order to gain the trust of audiences that they were seeking to influence. And that has now changed back, I would say, more broadly around the world because of the way that social media policies have changed, particularly since the beginning of the Trump era, with the retreat from trust and safety and content moderation procedures that protected democratic discourse before. We're seeing Russia return to some of those brute force tactics that we saw in 2013 and 2014. Bot networks, troll accounts, just like very clear fake accounts that a couple of years ago would have gotten immediately removed from social media platforms. They're now gaining traction again. So again, we're seeing kind of these peaks and troughs of Russian behavior.
Deepfakes generated by artificial intelligence are often indistinguishable from reality. Fake people on social media, their accounts, personal photos, and videos are created automatically and then fill social networks. The automation allows Russian intelligence services to analyze social trends in real time, identify sensitive topics, and aggressively push their chosen narratives. One of the main goals today is to weaken support for Ukraine. Huge volumes of generated content repeat the Kremlin's war narrative, accusing Western countries of fueling the conflict and undermining unity in Ukrainian and European societies. The loudest fakes usually target world leaders. For instance, Ukraine's president is falsely accused of multi-million-dollar purchases, among them, allegedly, Hitler's parade car.
Russian propaganda, when it operates, naturally targets different segments of the audience. For its domestic audience, first of all, they build support for Putin, support for the war, and portray Putin as infallible, almost saintly. On Russian TV channels, Putin is practically depicted as a deity who cannot make mistakes, whose authority is unquestionable. And anything positive that happens in the country is always credited to Putin. So what do we see now in relation to Ukrainians? First, they try to demotivate Ukrainians. They attempt to undermine faith in the armed forces in various ways. Attacks on the military leadership, claims that some clumsy operations are being carried out, that there are no military successes because of incompetent leadership in the armed forces, incompetent commanders who give criminal orders. All of this is being actively pushed through various Telegram channels that falsely pretend to be Ukrainian military units or individual Ukrainian soldiers, and sometimes through certain influential bloggers who are connected to the ongoing war or to significant military-related events. And well, naturally, Russia's main efforts right now are focused on minimizing or restricting any assistance to Ukraine. The main goal is to restrict military and financial aid so that Ukraine ends up isolated and is forced to surrender.
Primarily, the things that we see over and over again are that Ukraine is corrupt, that Zelensky is corrupt and a drug addict, that the reason the war in Ukraine is occurring is because of NATO, not because Russia invaded Ukraine. All of these are the key narratives that I see repeated, not only in Russian disinformation outlets, but now that are being repeated among Americans who may support President Trump as well. And we see members of President Trump's own cabinet, including after the Oval Office meeting with President Zelensky in February. Those narratives having quite so much support, particularly after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine across parties. There was widespread support for Ukraine. That lasted about, I would say, 18 months before we really started to see Russian propaganda and disinformation undermining Western support for Ukraine. And all of the narratives are the same. As I said, they are very sticky. I think Russia has tested them over time and understood that among Western audiences who have isolationist tendencies and perhaps don't understand the important role that Ukraine plays for transatlantic security and energy pipelines around the world, I think they don't understand why peace, a just and stable, lasting peace on Ukraine's terms is so important. And so those narratives persist, unfortunately.
Russia's information operations in Ukraine are systematic. Bots and deepfakes flood media, messengers, and social platforms. The main goal is to sow distrust in Ukraine's leadership and its allies. They claim Putin is ready for peace, while Zelensky and the West force Ukrainians to fight. This portrayal of Ukraine as an obstacle to peace is pushed by Moscow through paid Western bloggers and fake experts. In September 2024, the U.S. Department of Justice revealed that at least 6 influential American bloggers were secretly funded by the Kremlin to lobby Russian interests inside the U.S. According to the indictment, from October 2023 to August 2024, one U.S. media company received about $10 million from Russia Today. Various reports identify the company as Tenet Media, founded in 2022 by a far-right conservative couple from Tennessee.
Well, so we do know that the Russian government paid American and some Canadian YouTubers in order to create divisive content ahead of the 2024 election. The Tenet Media operation, which was a front for Россия Сегодня, to give money to bloggers who didn't know where it was coming from. There was an intermediary. They claimed to not know where it was coming from. They paid them huge sums of money to create divisive content. Now, these bloggers claim not only did they not know who they were working with, but that they had editorial independence over their content. But clearly the Russian government selected individual bloggers who were more likely to not only push divisive content, but push pro-Russia content. And we saw that a number of times across those bloggers. So where there's smoke, there's fire. I don't think that we have found every operation where Russia is individually paying influencers, media outlets, PR agencies to spread propaganda. We know they've done this in Africa. We know recently they have attempted to do this in France. So I think there's probably more where that came from.
The Kremlin is investing billions into supporting IPSO. Artificial intelligence has significantly expanded the scope of information warfare. Now, aggression unfolds not only in media and social networks, but also in their algorithms. This turns information into a weapon of mass destruction. Today, Russia doesn't need to use nuclear weapons to achieve geopolitical goals. It is far more effective to spread panic and fear of nuclear war.
So I think one of the things that Russia has been very good at is dangling the potential nuclear strikes as a disincentive to supporting Ukraine. We saw that early in the war, early since the full-scale invasion in the early days of 2022. And we're seeing that line return since Trump has entered office. We heard him, although he didn't mention nuclear weapons, I don't think, in the Oval Office meeting, he did say to Zelensky, "You're playing with World War III," right? And I think the idea there is, World War III, now a nuclear war with nuclear powers, including Russia. But the reality is that, as many times as Putin and his inner circle, Zakharova, Peskov, have repeated this line that, Russia may be forced to use nuclear weapons if this, if that, if Ukraine is armed, if the Western countries give Ukraine fighter jets, et cetera, et cetera. I think people don't recognize that, if we don't meet Russia with strength, that actually we're going to be closer to World War III in that case, rather than just saying, no, you can't do this. You can't unilaterally invade a country, a sovereign nation, and just claim territory for your own. I think that is the biggest misconception that does kind of instill panic.
By shutting down Russian TV channels, this is not censorship. It is restricting the capabilities of Russian propaganda. This is essentially a matter of security. Russia has paid enormous attention to propaganda and will continue to do so. And that's why we are seeing now, and will continue to see in the future, how Russia tries to influence the minds of people in Europe, European politicians, American politicians, anyone. Everywhere Russia has interests, everywhere it sees even the slightest opportunity to influence the restriction of aid to Ukraine, whether to prevent us from getting weapons at all, or to limit them as much as possible in terms of timing or types. Russia will target those points. And we need to be ready for this and work accordingly.
Information warfare is a battle not only for truth, but for reality itself, which the Kremlin seeks to distort. Where Russian tanks cannot go, bot armies and millions of fakes strike instead. The internet has become a battlefield and part of a global conflict. We are witnessing a struggle for control over artificial intelligence, and with it, over human consciousness, which has proven dangerously vulnerable to totalitarian regimes and their manipulation. Truth is not just a word, it is a weapon, and today it must be defended.